And if we look at what's happening, let's say, in Libya today or in Syria, where they're giving us a version of events which is totally fabricated. And again, it's always this notion of terrorists, which is behind the process of really indoctrination of U.S. public opinion. That is, I think, the most serious aspect. And the fact that people actually believe that the United States of America is threatened by foreign powers, when in fact the evidence amply confirms that the United States is an imperial power waging war in numerous countries with a massive military deployment, killing people all over the world, and then we're led to believe that the enemy number one is Osama bin Laden. I think that really, for me, that is a setback, a tremendous setback. And to the extent that you can't even question those things in the universities, okay? If you start to say, well, we'd like to discuss this, well, then immediately then you are subject to some kind of censorship, either by the university authorities or more broadly.
Unfortunately, that is absolutely the case, and it is interesting that the events of 9/11 occurred after a period of such great consolidation of the media, especially in the United States, and the concentration of so much media power in the hands of so few corporations, with now something akin to 90% of media in the United States being controlled by 6 corporations, or is it 5 now, as the mergers and acquisitions continue to accrue. And opposed to that, I guess, we also stood in 2001 on the cusp of the independent media that was empowered by the internet. And a shining example of that would be Global Research, which was one of the voices that was publishing some of these very important issues right there from the very beginning. So what can you say about the power of the alternative, independent, internet-empowered media in combating that disinformation?
Well, I think potentially there's tremendous strength of the alternative media, but when you compare it to the reach of the mainstream media, it's still very, very small. And then there's another phenomenon, is that many alternative media are in fact now they're funded by tax-free charities and foundations, which are in fact controlled by the economic elites, so that Rockefeller, Ford, MacArthur Foundation, and so on, all these big foundations will be supporting alternative media. And when you're supported by the seats of economic power, you ultimately toe the line in some regards. And I've noticed, for instance, as far as 9/11 truth is concerned, these mainstream progressive alternative media hesitate to actually address this. And they know that if they do address it, then maybe their funding is going to be cut off. So it's a no-no. For many, it's a no-no. And we have alternative media, in fact, who perform, I won't mention any names, but they're alternative media which have, in fact, undertaken smear campaigns against the 9/11 truth movement, against individuals, which in fact the mainstream media has not conducted in those terms. The mainstream media will smear, but they won't smear individuals in a very extensive way. And so that if we're looking at 9/11 truth, we have some really complex problems in the alternative media, because the alternative media are still saying, no, Al-Qaeda is behind 9/11. Okay, many people in the alternative media are saying that, and mind you, the alternative media, many areas of the alternative media are saying yes, it's a humanitarian war to bomb Syria. I'm sorry, to bomb Libya, but Syria is also being attacked. But it's a humanitarian operation to bomb Libya. And Gaddafi is a dictator, without addressing the broader issue of the fact that, one, people are being killed extensively, men, women, and children, by these NATO bombings, using the most advanced, sophisticated equipment, And secondly, the insurgency are in fact an Al-Qaeda affiliated organization, the Libya Islamic Freedom Group, which constitutes one of the mainstays of opposition forces under the Transitional Council today. And so there you have, and that's consistent with the CIA MI6 support of Al-Qaeda groups going back to the Soviet-Afghan War. They support the Libya Islamic Fighting Group affiliated to Al-Qaeda because that particular entity is an intelligence asset. And what are they doing? They're waging a jihad, or they're supporting the waging of a jihad against a secular Libyan government. Whether we like that government or not is not the issue. Okay? The fact of the matter is the objective is ultimately to reconquer Libya and confiscate its oil reserves. But again, we are led to believe, and that's where the progressive media comes in, certain segments of the progressive media, we are led to believe that ultimately, even though we dislike US foreign policy, we dislike NATO, that it is a humanitarian undertaking to invade countries like Yugoslavia in the late 90s. It is a humanitarian undertaking to invade Afghanistan, and it is also a humanitarian undertaking to bomb Libya and to support an armed insurgency against the government in Tripoli.
Well, it certainly is disheartening how so much of the alternative press has gotten behind these so-called Arab Spring and the so-called spontaneous uprisings, and it does seem that unfortunately people can still be corralled into a war mentality based on the flimsiest of war propaganda. And that is disheartening, but it is heartening to see, I think, fewer and fewer people are as willing to jump on board with the war propaganda as before. And I think there are signs of that in many different aspects of our society today. And it does raise the question of where we are heading, not only as, of course, the 9/11 truth movement, but the broader anti-war movement, and whether things are progressing in a way, or if you see that we are simply falling into the same traps that people have always been subject to.
I must observe the fact that the anti-war movement is in a deplorable state today compared to what it was in the months leading up to the invasion of Iraq, where we had large mobilizations. My experience of the anti-war movement is that it is divided. It doesn't support 9/11 truth, and this ultimately is the stumbling block, because many people in the anti-war movement, and I respect their position, but they're misinformed and their minds have been manipulated. But they say, we are against the war, but we support the war on terrorism. Okay, we support the campaign against terrorists. Now, that is, of course, a non sequitur. That type of statement is totally contradictory, because the war on terrorism is the backbone, it's the ideological pillar of America's war on conquest. And it's a big lie. And as long as you don't dismantle the big lie, there will be an element of legitimacy to waging a war on terrorists in different parts of the world. So, ironically, what has happened in the wake of 9/11 is that you have subsidiaries of Al-Qaeda virtually everywhere. You say Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in, Al-Qaeda in Libya. Of course, we've got all those organizations. Then you've got Al-Qaeda. You've got Al-Qaeda's virtually wherever the United States wants to intervene militarily, it creates an Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, we know, is an instrument of the CIA. So it's a very convenient ploy. We go after the terrorists, and then we get the support of certain people within progressive movements who are very sensitive to to the role of terrorist bombings and so on, and say, no, we have to go after the terrorists, without understanding that the war on terrorism and the war on conquest is one and the same thing, and that the war on terrorism is the justification for waging a war on conquest, a war of conquest. And if that war on terrorism dogma were to be questioned, the justification for waging the war on conquest would collapse like a deck of cards. They would not have a leg to stand on. Now, what they always tell people around the world, we are waging a humanitarian war, a war on terrorism, etc., etc. You have to support us. And these are the people who attacked attacked the United States on September 11. These are the people who are behind the Madrid bombings. These are the people who are behind the Bali bombings in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. And consequently, give us your support. And people in the anti-war movement will provide that support, but they will also say we're against war, which is a contradictory statement.
Completely contradictory on its face, and I think, as a number of people have pointed out, that the key to the anti-war movement is to embrace 9/11 truth, not reject it, and it does lead one to question the motives and the funding of a lot of the groups that claim to be so adamantly anti-war, while so rabidly pro-war in other aspects. But then I guess the 10th anniversary provides us not only a time to reflect on how our world has changed since the events of 9/11, but also to, I guess, consolidate our knowledge and what we've learned so far over the past 10 years and attempt to move things forward from here in a more positive way. And I understand there are a number of events taking place all around the world, and certainly in North America to mark those events and to mark the 9/11 Truth movement, the progress of the 9/11 Truth movement over the last 10 years. So what can you tell us about what's happening in Canada and in America for the 10th anniversary?
Well, I think we must understand that those events commemorating 9/11, they're not coming from the anti-war movement. They may be coming from a segment of the anti-war movement, but the anti-war movement is not involved in organizing a 9/11 commemoration. Okay? And in some regards, even the holding of these events is considered to be improper by the political establishment, but even by several progressive organizations. So it's this dichotomy between the 9/11 Truth movement on the one hand and the anti-war movement on the other, where there's some overlap, but there's not a, if the anti-war movement were to say we support 9/11 Truth, immediately we would have a much stronger position, because we would be able to address the people in high office and say, you are liars, okay? You are presenting this war and saying it's bin Laden that we're fighting, when in fact what you want is really to take control of 60% of the oil reserves, which are located in the Middle East, Central Asian region, okay? So that is, I think, a very important distinction between the anti-war movement and the 9/11 Truth movement. There are important events taking place. There are hearings which will be taking place in Toronto during 4 days. They're very important hearings, testimony of different writers, scholars, witnesses, family members. I think that the 9/11 Truth movement is very broad, but at the same time, there's some very fundamental divisions within this group, and I would say that the fundamental divisions within the group is the fact that there's been a lot of infiltration and people who are there to create divisions and so on. That happens in all movements.